In the first half of the 6th century, the Eastern Roman Empire was in its golden age. In those years, the most powerful man in the world was Emperor Justinian. While his commanders launched expeditions to both the East and the West, he was concerned with reforms that would shape world history. Justinian reigned among war and peace, chaos and order. History will never forget his name. However, behind this strong image was his wife, Theodora, one of the most controversial characters in Byzantine history. Theodora's life began very differently from that of a conventional empress. She was born in Constantinople in 500. Her father, Akakios, was a bear player in the greens at the racetracks. Her mother was a dancer and actress, so Theodora did not come from a noble family. However, those who thought that Theodora did not deserve the high position she gained after becoming empress were not judging her for that reason alone. The disdainful glances that were directed at her throughout her life were related to her personal choices in her past. It all started when her father got sick. Shortly thereafter, Akakios died, leaving behind his wife and 3 children. This untimely death was the beginning of disaster for the family, because the only source of income for the family was the money Akakios earned from playing bears. The Greens had already found a new employee for the vacant position. They had no intention of giving employment to Theodora's family. Desperate, her mother married a man in hopes of taking care of her family. However, nothing turned out as she had hoped. The man she married was unemployed. If this continued, the family would die in misery. They needed to find a job and earn a living as soon as possible. The Blues, the rival of the Greens, extended a helping hand to this family, which was on the verge of poverty. Theodora's stepfather got a job as a bear trainer in the Blues. Her mother wanted her daughters to take part in the performances as actresses. In ancient Rome, the acting profession was considered a vile job. An actress was seen in the same category as slaves and prostitutes. Even a free citizen would lose his citizenship if she became an actor. Freedom of thought was not even given to those who practiced this profession. Worse still, someone else could have killed a player without being held accountable in court. This perspective had not changed much during Theodora's lifetime. According to the book of the historian Procopius, called The Secret History, after the death of her father, Theodora began performing in shows with her sister. After a while, these performances became obscene. Theodora used her body both in front of the stage and behind the stage to make a living, and with her charm, beauty, and live dances, she was able to influence almost everyone from the lower and upper classes. Although she was popular on the stage and in the brothel, there were also those who wanted to escape from her lust. Those who saw her on the street would cross the road to avoid touching her, because they were afraid that if they accidentally touched her, it would stain their clothes. But these lines about the future empress should be approached with caution, because there are many historians who think that the main purpose of the secret history written by Procopius was to defame Theodora and Justinian. Whether what is said is true or not, Theodora's lifestyle was not very suitable for an intelligent and talented woman. She had to look for new ways to reveal her strong identity. Otherwise, the life she led would consume her after a while. At the age of 20, she caught the attention of a diplomat named Hecubulus, who was appointed governor of North Africa. Young and beautiful, she had an opportunity to get out of this life, and she wanted to seize it.
However, she could not succeed. Sometime after she arrived in North Africa with Heliobolus, his lover kicked her out. Desperate to return to her native city, Constantinople, Theodora began to make her way along the coast. She was hungry and thirsty and had no place to stay. She allegedly had to meet her needs by selling her body, as she had done before. But in the end, fate brought her to Alexandria and then to Antioch, where she would reveal the empress she would become in a few years. This desperate journey would mark a major turning point that would change Theodora's life and beliefs.
She had the opportunity to meet influential people and patriarchs in the cities she visited on her way to Constantinople. Her conversations with the clergy had a profound effect on her. She adopted monophysitism, which believed that the divine and human nature of Jesus was united in one body, in one essence. She gradually left her old life behind, learned more about social manners, and acquired new skills.
By the time she arrived in Constantinople in 522, she had left that loose woman behind and became a well-established woman who knew what she was doing.
She was determined not to perform anymore and not to work in a brothel. She devoted most of her time to wool spinning, thus making a living. At the same time, she was more preoccupied with religious matters and lived a reclusive life. However, although she tried to lead a quiet life away from people, her beauty would eventually attract the attention of a respectable man, Justinian, the nephew of the Roman Emperor Justin I. Justinian, who fell in love with him at the first sight, wanted to unite his life with Theodora. As a matter of fact, Theodora could not fail to respond to this. Justinian was the future emperor, and this love was a unique opportunity for Theodora to rise. The young woman did not remain indifferent to Justinian's great love and accepted his marriage proposal.
But there were some problems. A law enacted by Emperor Constantine 200 years ago prevented the couple from marrying. Under this law, government officials were forbidden to marry actors. Justinian was the sole heir of his uncle Justin and served as consul. That is, his position meant that this law prevented Justinian from a marriage with an actress.
Also in the empire, the popular approach was the diophysitic Christian faith, which held that Jesus was divided into two existences, divine and human, as opposed to the monophysitism adopted by Theodora. In short, Theodora's being a monophysite was contrary to the Christian belief adopted in Rome. Emperor Justin's wife, Euphemia, was also opposed to marriage for this reason. She even declared that she would never approve of this marriage in her lifetime, citing both Theodora's faith and the strict laws of Rome. Indeed, it did not happen in her lifetime. This marriage did not take place until Euphemia died in 524. After the Empress's death, the couple's hopes rose again. Justinian, who was determined to marry Theodora, tried to persuade his uncle to abolish the law that prevented this marriage after the death of his aunt. In any case, it could not be said that Emperor Justin was very opposed to this marriage. He acted as if he was protesting so as not to have trouble with Euphemia.
But now that his wife had died, he was free to act as he wished. Unable to endure the endless insistence of Justinian, he abolished this law. Right after, he passed a new law in 524. According to this law, players could marry someone who was not of their own class, if approved by the emperor. Thus, the only obstacle to the happiness of Theodora and Justinian was removed, and the couple married in a magnificent wedding in 525. 3 years later, in 528, Emperor Justin died. Justinian became the new emperor of Eastern Rome. He was now the strongest man in the world.
This event brought about a great change, not only in Justinian's life, but also in Theodora's life. Theodora had been on stage for a living since she was little and was despised and insulted by everyone. Now, she had reached the highest position in the world a woman could reach. She was now the Byzantine Empress.
Although she was at times ashamed of her past, Theodora never made an effort to hide it. She even took her illegitimate daughter, whose identity is not known with certainty, to the palace. It was not known if this daughter was from Justinian. Frankly, Justinian didn't have much of a problem with this. Despite this, at every opportunity, there were those who wanted to remind her where she came from. At this point, Theodora's image as an empress came to the fore. At that time, as today, the impression of appearance was of vital importance, and Theodora knew that very well. Purple robes, dazzling gold, and shimmering jewels, worn only by the nobility, these were always on her to remind everyone of her strength. While hosting the members of the empire, foreign ambassadors, and dignitaries who came to meet with her, she applied certain protocols to remind them of her authority. Leaving the exceptions out of this, she usually made her visitors wait for hours before they were admitted to her presence. Those who wanted to see her only as the young and beautiful wife of an old emperor were often quite uncomfortable with being crushed by her status. Because, according to some, Theodora went far beyond these ascriptions and started to rule the empire behind the scenes by surpassing the usual concept of a companion spouse.
She was active in the state administration and often had a say in the decisions to be taken. Because she had the ability to do it, she spent most of her time reading books and put a lot of effort into improving herself.
But the shadow of the past continued to hover around Theodora throughout her life. Both the whispered speeches in dark corners and the public discourses did not go unnoticed by the Empress. By contrast, Theodora's never denying what was said about her past meant that she was defying hostile talks on her. She also did not do much to deny the talks that she was using her position for her own interests. Probably because there wasn't anything to deny.
It was true. She openly enjoyed the authority of the position that was bestowed upon her with the marriage. She once had to sacrifice a lot to survive. She was often humiliated. She perhaps had to lead a life she didn't want and eventually retreated into seclusion. After that, having met Justinian, she was in power now. Perhaps her eagerness to show the extent of her authority stemmed from this fact. She wanted to find compensation and a reward for the pain she endured, albeit to a disturbing extreme at certain times. While Justinian transformed the empire with a series of reforms during his rule, Theodora used her current position to take tremendous strides in women's rights. In 528, she brought the death penalty for kidnapping and rape, protecting all women in the lower and upper strata. She introduced a series of laws in 534 and 535 that made it a crime to force women into prostitution. She also enacted laws protecting women's rights in matters of divorce and property division. However, as we have mentioned before, we can find clues in historical records that Theodora was a smug and despotic empress. She was able and willing to dismiss the officials she could not control, and she could force the people around her to marry against their will. While Theodora was busy with this kind of work, Justinian was interested in new lands to be conquered and construction projects. that would increase the splendor of Constantinople. He was ambitious, innovative, and not afraid to take responsibility, often neglected to rest and eat. Some nights he only slept for an hour. He wanted to make the capital, Constantinople, the most magnificent city on earth. But in order to do this, he needed an enormous source of income, and he needed to get this source of income as soon as possible. The first practice he put into effect was to increase the taxes he received from the public. However, this situation caused great dissatisfaction in the empire. There was grumbling in every corner of Constantinople, including the palace. When the unrest began to increase, Justinian appealed to the loyalty of the Blues party, which had an important place in Byzantine politics. The hippodrome races held in Rome were not just shows. Each group participating in the races actually represented a political view. These were grouped into greens, blues, reds, and whites. Emperors supported one of these groups and made it clear which group they supported. The side that Justinian supported was the blues. But the blues were not a secure base on which the empire could lean. The blues were ambitious and armed. This made them a group that constantly got involved in dirty work. They ignored the suffering of the people for the sake of their own interests. The emperor's desire to make Constantinople a more glorious place made no sense to the blues. Yes, Justinian had brought the blues to his side in order to implement his own policies, but the blues' loyalty to the empire would not last long. The two biggest opposing groups in Eastern Roman politics were the blues and the greens, and the disagreement between them continued into the reign of Justinian. In January 532, this conflict turned into a rebellion that brought the empire to the brink of destruction. Eudaemon, governor of Constantinople, had a group of both greens and blues arrested and imprisoned. All were charged with murder. The punishment for this was obvious. They would be executed. These developments had provoked both the greens and the blues. Finally, both groups rose up during the races held at the hippodrome. Their targets were Justinian and his glorious city, Constantinople. Enraged and seeking revenge, the rebels suddenly began to turn the city upside down. City officials were murdered, and buildings were set on fire. Magna Ecclesia, the marketplaces, the Forum of Constantine, the area around the palace, and hundreds of houses were set in flames. Enraged rebels demanded that the administration hand over 2 officials to carry out their execution. However, Justinian refused this request. Unable to get what they wanted, the rebels became even more ambitious. Unable to suppress the uprising, Justinian, Theodora, and the military officials in the upper command closed themselves in the palace and began to think about what to do. They hoped that if they didn't intervene and stay out of sight, the rebellion would subside. However, it did not turn out as they expected. The rebels had already sought a new ruler, taking advantage of the emperor's absence. They wanted to overthrow Justinian and replace him with Hypatios, the nephew of the deceased Emperor Anastasios. They even had Hypatios sit on a throne they established in the hippodrome and declared him the new emperor of Rome.
The city had turned into a fireball, so to speak. Meanwhile, Justinian was making plans to escape in his palace. Even high-ranking soldiers under his command, such as Narses and Belisarius, agreed with Justinian that this was the best remedy. But Theodora had no intention of escaping. She didn't get her strength easily. and she didn't want to lose everything on a single day. All of a sudden, her voice began to echo in the large hall of the palace.
It is unbearable for an emperor to live as a fugitive. If you want to save your life, it's easy. Here is the sea, and here are the ships at your command. However, after you are saved, you can choose death instead of the port of refuge. As for me, royal purple is the noblest shroud. Theodora's youth was spent in struggle, and she had no intention of giving up all the hard work she'd spent for her reputation. Her words gave Justinian great courage. The panic atmosphere in the palace dissipated in an instant. An army was gathered under the leadership of General Belisarius and Commander Mundus, and action was taken to suppress the rebellion. More than 30,000 rebels were killed during the counterattacks. Hypatios, who was declared emperor, was captured and executed upon Theodora's insistence. This event, known as the Nika Revolt, was one of the bloodiest events in Eastern Roman history, and Justinian suppressed this rebellion thanks to Theodora's determination. The suppression of such a revolt also guaranteed the reign of Justinian and Theodora. The people of Constantinople now understood that they could not be overthrown. This was thanks to Theodora's determined and strong stance. But this was not the only occasion when the Empress guarded the throne. By 540, the empire was shaken by an infectious disease this time. The emperor fell ill with this deadly disease and fell into bed. The administration of the state was entirely in the hands of Theodora. Even in such a difficult time, Theodora did not let go of the administration and managed to protect the empire until Justinian got back on his feet.
Perhaps love binded the couple who ruled the Eastern Roman Empire. Perhaps it was the sheer ambition of Theodora. Or perhaps it was both. Whatever it was, it is certain that it was powerful enough to last many hardships. Although we cannot ignore Theodora's intelligence, willpower, and self-confidence, it is an undeniable fact that Justinian was the biggest supporter of this powerful image she drew. She had the full support of her husband, the emperor, in almost every action she took. They both took steps to preserve the balance amidst their different opinions and culture. In a way, they showed the empire how it can continue to survive and thrive amidst extreme differences in culture, belief, and opinion. Their marriage was a beacon of hope for the empire that was quite prone to disintegrity.
Theodora founded a Monophysite monastery in Constantinople and protected those who were dismissed because of their beliefs in her palace. She also offered safe shelter to the Monophysite bishops. Excommunicated in the city, the Monophysite patriarch Anthemus had spent 12 years in safety in a monastery under Theodora's patronage. But as with everything, there was an end to Theodora's reign. By 28 June 548, the Empress died. Only her works and a name remained from her in history. Her husband, Justinian, did not want people to forget her name. He continued to pass laws on women's rights. Before the Empress died, he had promised to protect the Monophysite congregation, and he kept that promise all his life. An intelligent, strong, charismatic, and admirable woman had passed through Constantinople. A woman, an actress, a prostitute, an empress. Theodora, who managed to have a say in the Eastern Roman administration. This loose young woman from the slums of Constantinople defied all hardships and succeeded in making her mark in history as one of the most influential women in the world.